Angus, Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke set off a debate between businesses and unions this week when he announced changes to casual employment. What did he say?
Yeah, so just to give you a bit of context, this is the second tranche of the government's industrial relations reforms. Last year was quite controversial with the introduction of bargaining overhaul, and this year is basically expected to be no different. Industrial relations always becomes quite the ideological battleground. What Burke mentioned in regards to changes to casual employment is basically he wants to overhaul the definition of what it means to be a casual employee. So say if you work standard hours, you clock in regular shifts over a period of time, you're actually more likely to be a permanent employee rather than a casual. The second part of that is they want to make it easier for casual employees to become permanent if they want to.
So what will the effect of this legislation be then?
Well, like everything in the industrial relations space, it's definitely up for debate. Basically what Tony Burke says is it will probably affect about 850,000 people. There's over 2 million casuals in Australia. He says about 850,000 of those are actually working regular hours. So they could convert to permanent work if they wanted to. However, the big question mark is whether they'll want to. And he basically says, look, only probably a tiny proportion of those people will actually want to go on and convert to permanency. So it may not have the biggest effect.
But how controversial is this proposed changes? You mentioned the previous ones were a bit of a fight. Does the government face another fight getting these ones through Parliament?
Almost definitely. So businesses have already businesses and unions are already going head-to-head basically over what this means. And for businesses, they're saying, well, these laws actually unwind a fair bit of uncertainty that they were already given in previous years about casual work and how to apply laws around casual work, whereas unions are saying, well, actually, this is all about job security, and these reforms will give a lot of people in casual work a bit more security around their lives and around their work-life balance as well. Interestingly, there's a renewed focus on small business in this debate as well. That kind of became the tip of the sword last year in the debate around the changes to bargaining laws. And again, we're seeing a renewed focus there, being a sector full of mum and dad operators, essentially. And we've got a lot of crossbenchers coming out now and saying they're keeping a close eye on those effects. And David Pocock, who was basically the kingmaker in the Senate last year, he got the government's laws passed, is already holding roundtables with both businesses and unions at the moment. So it's definitely a watch this space scenario.
Let's move on to another topic that's not happening in Parliament but will have political ramifications, Shane. On Tuesday, the Reserve Bank Board is meeting and they'll decide whether or not to raise interest rates again. Can mortgagors breathe a sigh of relief?
They should be able to. The inflation figures that we got on Wednesday showing annual inflation falling from 7 to 6% also showed that a lot of the pressure in certain key areas is starting to abate. We've had global inflation figures out of the US, out of Canada, the Eurozone, even out of Britain, showing that inflation is coming down quicker than what central banks had expected. And that should give some comfort to everyone owes a bank money, anyone who's trying to get a rental, any business operator, some sort of hope that the Reserve Bank is finished whacking them. Let's just say maybe 70 to 80% confidence level. It's not a done thing. It's not locked in by any sense of the term that the bank may actually think, right, we want inflation to come down faster, or that they're not convinced that, particularly in the services sector, which is where the Reserve Bank has really started to talk up a big game, that inflation in that space, which actually increased slightly. There's all sort of technical reasons for that. The general trend is it's coming down, that may force the Reserve Bank maybe into one more rate rise. Like everyone, including in the Reserve Bank, thinks we are very close to either a full stop on further rate rises or maybe one more.
And economists are quite split, as always, on this topic, Shane. But what are some of the arguments for another rate rise next week?
Well, those arguments are those economists saying that there will be one more. Many of them have actually put money into the argument that there will be one more. So once you get into this space, economists often will talk their prediction from last week or the week before. And this is why the argument is it's so nuanced and so like we are around the coin toss sort of argument. Do you believe that inflation in services sector is going to stay high, and that means that inflation won't come down as fast as you expect? Or are you on the other side saying, no, there's a lot of interest rate pain still to come through now, and you've got to get your mind around this. Interest rates take 12 to 18 months to fully work their way through the economy. So the Reserve Bank in July last year increased interest rates by 0.5 percentage point, and they increased them by 0.5 percentage point in August. Those interest rate increases from a year ago are just starting to really fully work their way through the economy. That took the cash rate to, what was it, about 1.6, 1.7. We're at 4.1. There's a lot of whacking to come from the RBA that still has its way to work through the economy. And I think one of the things that are often forgotten is that RBA Governor Phil Lowe has talked uphill and down dale about the fact that he's got unemployment at 3.6, 3.5, somewhere in there, exceptional low level. More than 450,000 people have got a job over the past 12 months. From the Reserve Bank, it's got a dual mandate, get inflation between 2 and 3 and get full employment. It's got full employment, and there are people in work today and getting paid who wouldn't otherwise if interest rates went up. So the bank has made this decision. We think inflation will gradually get its way down to the top of its target band by the middle of 2025. If we went further, if we pushed interest rates up high to get inflation down sooner, more people would lose their job. And that's a real key thinking point that a lot of economists haven't put their mind to, and a lot of those, the hawks out there saying, let's bring inflation down as soon as possible, don't want to countenance, because that would mean real financial pain for hundreds of thousands of people.
Shane, you mentioned that inflation is falling, but it's still quite high at 6%. How much will that, coupled with whatever the Reserve Bank decides to do next week, fuel parliamentary debate?
It'll be front and centre because the coalition, they got whacked in the run-up to the last election about cost of living pressures. And they're returning serve because inflation has gone up. It peaked at 7.8% in the December quarter, and every survey around consumers, around businesses, is showing that cost of living, be it an extraordinary increase in mortgage repayments to the cost of bread, which has gone up the best part of 14% over the past 12 months. Man and woman can't live on bread alone. They can't afford bread at the moment. So you're getting into something that is absolutely central, and it's politically around the world. High inflation is not good for an incumbent government, and the coalition is going to really push what's going on, whether the government can do anything about it, what the government should do about it.
And finally, let's touch on the new face in Parliament next week. Cameron Caldwell will enter Parliament for the first time on Monday as the new MP for Fadden after winning the Gold Coast seat in a by-election earlier this month. Angus, what do we know about him?
Well, we know he's not Stuart Robert, which is something that Peter Dutton has been very keen to emphasise, obviously in the lead up to the poll where Cameron Caldwell took the vote. He is basically he's a long-standing Gold Coast councillor. He's a family man, and he's a previous small business owner as well, which I think will probably be quite useful in the coalition's line of questioning come the first question time as well, when they obviously turn the heat up on the government about the cost of living as well, and the cost of small business that flows on.
But that's not the only issue around new MPs. The Australian Electoral Commission is kicking off what will be a very interesting redistribution process. For those who love their psephology and the face of the parliament, population swings mean that WA is going to get an extra seat. Victoria and New South Wales are going to both lose a seat. This process is going to take the next 12 months or so. So Victoria is the absolute crown in Labor's throne, really. But there's a real chance that a seat like Goldstein, Higgins, Kooyong, Chisholm, that whole area in the inner southeast of Melbourne, you could go from 4 seats down to 3, and that will have reverberations. In New South Wales, where we're still waiting to see when Scott Morrison will announce his resignation and there'll be a by-election in the seat of Cook, you can see a major redrawing of the seats of Sydney. And over in the West, where the Labor Party picked up a lot of seats at the last election, the Liberal Party was effectively chased out of Perth for the first time in more than 30 years. There's a real chance of Labor picking up a seat over in the West, in the southeastern suburbs around Matt Keogh's electorate just south of Gosnells. So that's the slow burn, because and you'll actually see the number of seats in the federal parliament reduced from 151 to 150, which also has ramifications. The Teals, who picked up so many seats at the last election, Sydney and Melbourne, real issues for them, whether they can withstand a redistribution, because we actually don't see there's no real history of a redistributed seat being held by an independent being held at the subsequent election. There's all sorts of these issues that are going to play out, and the internecine wars within a party, when someone's fighting somebody else to keep a seat, they make really interesting copy.
And how uncertain does this make the outcome of the next election? We always like to talk about swings to one party or to another or to an independent, but with totally new seats, how hard is that?
It's exceptionally difficult, and we've seen, when I came in to work here, there were 148 seats, and there have been redistributions every election. The relative power of WA and Queensland, now remember, Queensland is Peter Dutton's base, really strongly is. The relative power of the two resource states have grown at the expense of South Oz, New South Wales, because Victoria's been able to lift its population share as well. So you've seen this power tension change over time between the populations. These sorts of tensions take time, but they do show you how the population is changing, the country is changing, and it changes the politics.
Well, Shane, Angus, always lovely to chat with you on the podcast.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Rachel.
Thank you for having me on.